Welcome, everybody, to the Proactive Adventure Health and Wellness Podcast. My name is Joe Proscia, and I'm the founder of Proactive Adventure Health and Wellness. I'm calling this episode of the podcast Episode 0, or a Prelude, or a prologue. Proactive is essentially a hiking group. It's a group I started back in 2017, and I've been wanting to do a podcast for quite a long time, because since I started Proactive, I've had the pleasure of meeting hundreds of really smart and really funny, just very interesting people. And from the very beginning, when I started Proactive with ideas of an app, with ideas of a larger brand, with ideas of so many different things, I was always more fascinated with the people who take part in these activities, like hiking and kayaking and trail running and rock climbing. I was always more fascinated with why they were doing it, what it meant to them, and how it affected other aspects of their life, whether it be professionally, socially, mentally, physically. I always wanted Proactive to focus more on people. I always knew it would be based around hiking, or the outdoors more broadly. But what I really wanted was for Proactive to be a catalyst of positive change for other people, and myself. So I'm sure a lot of you who are listening right now have either hiked with us in the past, know us from social media, Instagram primarily. Some of you have just run into us on a mountain, and some of you may not know us at all. You may have stumbled on this podcast looking for something about hiking or the outdoors or a specific place you're looking to hike. So I wanted to put together this episode to just sort of explain what Proactive is, give a little backstory on how it got started, and hopefully give you a little idea about what to expect from this podcast going forward. And I'd like to admit right off the top that even though I've been wanting to do a podcast like this for quite a while, I have been agonizing over getting this first one recorded. I originally started with bullet points that I wanted to discuss, and then it sort of evolved into notes, and then it turned into almost a script. I know it'll be difficult for me to record an episode of this podcast by myself, because I do intend on having really interesting conversations with others going forward. But I wanted to give a little context before we got into all that. But I'm going to consider this a challenge to tackle, and hopefully this will come out and be somewhat interesting, and set us up for some more interesting things in the future. Anyway, I come to you today sitting at my computer with the notes and the bullet points and the script just sitting beside me. And now that I have agonized over this for a few weeks, and have looked at these notes so much, and wrote a partial script, I'm going to, for all intents and purposes, just wing it. So I'm going to start by talking a little bit about myself, and giving some backstory, because I feel like that's the best way for me to really explain the motivations as to why I started Proactive, and it will put things into better perspective, give a little context. And I'll be real concise about my childhood before I get into the more important events. So I was born in 1986. Me and my family lived in a cramped house, with 6 of us, in a 2-bedroom, 3 siblings of mine and my parents. I had a good childhood, though. I was always a happy kid. I was a good student, I was nice and goofy. I was kind of creative. I always liked writing and drawing. And even though I grew up right outside of New York City, I always do remember being outside. I was always outside playing sports with my friends, or my father would take me fishing a lot. We were at the beaches, which I could still count as outdoors, and I just always found myself playing around in the woods, whether it be with my friends or my family. I just remember being outside a lot. I loved Batman. I loved horror movies, which my father made me watch probably way too young, which I appreciate now. Basketball cards, probably more than basketball the sport. And I really got into professional wrestling, which led me to join the recreational wrestling team when I was younger, and then wrestle a little bit in high school. And I remember kind of coming into my own and feeling real good in, sophomore, junior year of high school. It was around then that I started to get into music, started to expand socially, started dating more, going to different parties, and got the chance to travel to Italy during those times. So it was a good period of my life where I felt on an upward trajectory. Just things felt good. I never really took the college experience too seriously. I was still a good student at the time. I didn't really try that hard necessarily, but I just understood how to do well in school. And so the teachers and the guidance counselors were not necessarily pressuring me. They were more just expecting me to wind up at a good college. My parents didn't give me any pressure, but they also sort of seemed to just expect that I would go through the process. So I took the SATs, I wrote a couple of unenthused college essays and sent out a few applications, and then I wound up being accepted to a few local schools here in New Jersey. I wound up deciding to go to St. Peter's College in Jersey City, which was very close to my home. A friend of mine was going there as well. So in September 2004, I started at St. Peter's College with a major in business management. At the same time, I had just gotten my first job at Sam Goody, which is a music store. But yeah, we used to sell CDs and music, and I started my first job at the same time I started college. So I'm a few months into college. I'm hating it. I'm not really feeling like I'm learning anything, and it feels like high school all over again. And either after school or on my days off, I'm going to work at this music store. So now it's December, and I'm really not enjoying this college experience. And I start thinking that maybe I'll go to a different school or I'll figure something out. And I tell my mother that I don't want to go back to college. And not surprisingly for my mother, but maybe surprisingly for other people's parents, she's totally supportive of it. She sees that I'm working. She just kind of expects me to figure it out. That I'll make the right decision at some point for myself. And so it was around that time that I had just started smoking cigarettes, weed. My father was working in Philadelphia, so he would pop in on the weekends. He worked in the motion picture industry, so he was going where the work was. So then it's late spring, maybe early summer of 2005, and I leave Sam Goody. So now I have no job, and I'm not going to school. So the summer of 2005, I remember being a lot about hanging out, smoking weed. I really got into the Beatles at that time. I was like a quasi-hippie. Really didn't know what I was going to do. My intentions were always to go back to school at some point, presumably in, January 2006. So I'm riding out the summer. I just remember going to a lot of parties, hanging out with friends a lot, really enjoying ourselves that summer. My family felt like it was in a good place at the time. My father would come home on the weekends from Philly. My mother was there. My grandmother was always over. My older sister, who had two children at the time, two young children, would be hanging out. So it was a really good summer. Just remember having a really good time. So now it's August 2005. I'm not working. I'm not going to school. Everything is good. I'm enjoying the summer. I'm riding on this high of summer 2005. So now it's August 8th. 2005, and it's a weird memory I have, but I remember the newscaster Peter Jennings died on August 8th, 2005, and I remember my mother was real spooked by it, and she was real affected by the death of Peter Jennings, because I remember even back in April of 2005, when he, announced that he had lung cancer, it really affected her, and I remember her mentioning it back then in April of 2005, so now it's August 8th, 2005, and she's deeply affected by the death of Peter Jennings. She starts talking about how she needs to quit smoking and get healthy. So now a week goes by, and it's August 15th, 2005. I'm still just rolling along on this great summer, having a good time. And that day I had planned on taking my mother and my younger sister to the mall to buy clothes and supplies for her senior year of high school. So I remember I went out in the morning to the store to, I think, buy a CD or something. And I got home, and my mother was ready to go and just really impressed and appreciative of my punctuality. And so I remember just having a really good day with my mother. It was a weird day. I remember a huge thunderstorm rolled in, and it downpoured at one point. And I remember driving home from the mall. I noticed something was weird. My mother had been saying she had a headache all day. And I remember we passed my older sister and my grandmother with the kids walking in the street, and generally I felt like no matter what, if we had passed my grandmother and my sister and the kids, that my mother would definitely had told us to stop. But that day I remember she said she just wanted to go straight home. She said she had that headache, she just wanted to go home. And so that night I remember my mother was at the table reading her book that she had bought, a Danielle Steele book, at the kitchen table, and I had said to her, I'm going to go out. I was going to a party up the street from my house. And so she said she still had that headache, and I told her to take some pain reliever. And I went out to this party, and I remember, whatever, just having a few drinks, smoking some weed, par for the course of summer 2005. So I get home later that evening, I lay down, I go to sleep. So my mother wakes me up in the middle of the night, tells me she just wanted to see if I was up, told me she was taking something for her headache and going back to sleep, that she'd see me in the morning, and that she loved me. So I told her I loved her. She went back to sleep. I went back to sleep. And I remember this odd occurrence later on it still felt like the middle of the night. It was probably the early morning hours. The family cat, Kitty, forced her way into my room and just all fluffed up and crawled into the bed and started to cuddle with me and was purring really intensely. I didn't really think anything of it, even though it had never happened before. So now the cat's cuddling with me real oddly. So I'm in a nice deep sleep. One of those real good, easy, summer 2005 deep sleeps. Then, boom, all of a sudden I'm woken up by all three of my siblings standing in my room, waking me up. There's some tears. Everybody looks a little shaken. And they're all yelling at me that Mom won't wake up. And immediately, at that moment, I felt a shift in my entire mindset. I kind of knew what was going on right at that moment. I'm not going to get too far into the details about exactly how it all went down, but I'll tell you that I really felt a shift at the moment I went into the room and confirmed that my mother had passed away. So it's August 16th, 2005, and my whole life has changed at that moment. So my father's still working in Philadelphia. My grandmother is on her way to the house to do some more school shopping. So without a choice, really, I took charge of the situation. I remember calling 911, trying to follow instructions that they were giving me on the phone, and my mother, who was really the glue of the family, had passed away unexpectedly of a brain aneurysm at the age of 49. My father had to rush back from Philly. We had to break the news to my grandmother because she was already walking over to the house, not knowing what she was walking into. So anyway, this was a really jarring moment. My mind shifted into a different gear. The looseness and the just easy living of summer 2005 was definitely over. So after this, my family starts to stretch apart a little bit. I see less and less of them as they all start doing their own thing. I decided I needed to get a job. My uncle got me a job briefly at the power company for PSE&G. I only lasted a few months there, but I really knew I needed a job. I needed to do something with my life. It was about March 2006, I believe. A friend of mine got me my first job at a hotel. My job was to basically set up and break down rooms for like weddings and meetings and stuff. I really enjoyed it. I was able to kind of just do my own thing there. Anyway, it was a job, and I was having a good time working with a buddy of mine. But when summer of 2006 rolled around, my buddy Dan and I didn't think working at the Wyndham Suites for the summer sounded like a good idea. So we basically just picked up and quit that job to enjoy the summer. So I found myself back in the same boat that I was in previously, with no work, no school, and really no direction. So after enjoying a few months again, just sort of hanging out and being generally unproductive, I again realized I need a job. So I searched around, and I took a job at another hotel near my home called the Homewood Suites. And I took a job there as what they call houseman, which is a janitor slash van driver. So I was a shuttle driver and a janitor at this hotel. I started there in, I think, November 2006. And so now this is where I see another shift in my mindset, because I'm here at this job now. I've quit jobs and left jobs just to sort of hang out before. And I see potential for growth here. So it was within like maybe a year or so that I went to the management of the hotel and I said I would like to try something different, and they put me on the front desk. So after a few months on the front desk, I went back to management and said, what else can I do to make a little more money? So I started working overnight. I did that for a few months. After a few months of that, I saw an opening in one of the assistant management positions at the hotel, and I remember working an overnight shift. I think my car may have been in the shop at the time. I didn't have my car, so I was walking about 2 miles to work, to and from every day, overnight. And so I remember I went home, took a nap, woke up a few hours later, and I walked back down to the hotel, and I walked into the manager's office and I said, I'd like to be considered for a management position. And I had been doing good work. I had been showing up. So he takes me up on my request and makes me the assistant manager of this hotel at age 21, maybe. A few months prior to becoming manager at the hotel, when I was still working overnight, I had made the decision to move out of my family home. I was still living with my father at the time, but he was spending a lot of time with his new girlfriend. My siblings were never home, so it was really just an empty house that we all used to live in. So I had moved out in June 2007, and it was that same year that my father gave me a call and told me to meet him at a restaurant. Now, he had gone through a rough time after my mother passed away. He had a new girlfriend, and he was really, spending those 2 years trying to, recover from the loss of his wife. So he calls me up in sometime in 2007 and tells me to meet him at a restaurant. And it was very unusual for him to not tell me what he wanted to say on the phone and telling me to meet him at a restaurant. So I knew something was up. I go to the restaurant, and he's there, has a drink in his hand, and he just tells me that he's been diagnosed with stomach cancer. He insists that it's not that serious, that he's going to go to the doctor and get it taken care of, and he just wanted to let me know. So that's my father's trajectory from that point. He's still going to work and whatnot, still living his life, and life goes on. It's a harsh reality, but when things like this happen, life does go on. So everybody's working hard, going about their business, and it's 2009, and my roommate of the last 2 years tells us that we're going to move into a new place with a third roommate and a couple people we know that live upstairs in this house, and we're going to have this whole big setup now. So I move into this new house, and I think maybe a month or two later, I'm let go at the Homewood Suites. So here I am, without a job again. And now I'm living on my own without a job. So now I'm on the hunt for a job again, but this time I'm trying to find a job during a economic recession. So it's hard for me to immediately find another hotel job or anything comparable to the job I had. So I go for a few months, and my buddy hooks me up with a job selling hydroxychloroquine on the phones as a telemarketer. And so I'm working whatever this job is. I'm terrible at it. I'm not really a good salesperson, especially for something like hydroxychloroquine. So I'm really struggling. It's about May 2010 now. Hating this new job. I really feel rudderless, wishing I could be, getting another hotel job, because I felt like that's where I was comfortable. So my father, who is fighting cancer at the time and still working in the motion picture industry as a set dresser, he takes me into work in May 2010. It's one of the greatest work experiences I ever had. I was able to work alongside my father for an entire project on a movie called The Oranges with Hugh Laurie. And I was able to work on this movie with him. It was a world that I was sort of aware of because he would take me to work when I was younger, but I didn't really understand the scope of all the work until I was able to work on this job with him. I won't talk about the work too much now, details about what it is exactly and how it works, but it was creative work, it was a lot of work, it was fun work, and it was well-paying, so I felt really good at this point, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. So now it's late summer 2010, and I get a job at the Embassy Suites as the assistant front office manager. I was happy. So I had finished the job with my father, I had this new job of my own, and I was living in this house with all these different people. There was definitely like a party atmosphere in that house. And there was a girl there that I had gotten close with, and we were celebrating this new job of mine, and she asked if I wanted to try some cocaine. I had never done cocaine in my life. And like the weak-minded person I was at the time, even though I had told myself I would never do cocaine, I jumped right in. And that got me started on a 3-year relationship with cocaine. Something I never thought I would have to worry about. And then I think it got real bad when I realized that I did not need to be hanging out with her to get cocaine. So then I started to spend a lot of time alone. So now it's the summer of 2011. I'm working at another hotel. I was a really functioning addict, so I would be able to do that at night and still show up for work, ready to work, and getting my job done very well, despite the fact that I was going on nightly benders. I decided to leave the Embassy Suites at a certain point, and I actually found another job at the hotel that I spent the most time at, and this is where I actually was hired in as just the assistant general manager of this hotel. So despite whatever else was going on in my life, I was doing well professionally. And this was a good job, and I felt really comfortable at this place, really liked the people I was working with. It was a lot of responsibility at this particular hotel. It was a lot of work, long hours, but I was just kind of riding the wave. So now it's 2012, and I'm working at this hotel. In February of that year, my grandmother, my mother's mother, passed away. She was 93, and I remember getting a call from my father the day that my grandmother passed away, and he asked if I was all right, and I said I was. And I remember him sounding very weak. He had been sick for a number of years, and the surgeries were unsuccessful. You know, he started doing chemo. I remember just him softening up a bit in these years. He had stopped working at a certain point. I think it was in late 2011, maybe. And I just remember visiting him and seeing him getting weaker and weaker. And it was really a shame to see my father, who was a really, strong, vigorous man. He was a presence. And I saw him just getting weaker and weaker. And I forget exactly when it was that he told us that he was going to stop taking the treatment and admit himself into hospice care. But I do remember him telling us with some sort of sense of peace when he told us. And so at that point, I remember just visiting him and, hanging out with him. And I was at work one day and I get a phone call from his girlfriend that, or he wasn't doing well. And I remember we went to his house and we were there for a few days of just having him in bed, sort of not really there. Really bizarre to see him like that. And it was August 19th, 2012, when I was heading over to his house. And when I got there, his girlfriend told me that he had passed away. My father was a little younger than my mother, so when he died in 2012, he was also 49. So at this point, both of my parents are passed away at the age of 49. And I'm in my mid-20s at this point. And the hit of my father passing away was quite different than the hit that I got when my mother passed away, because this one I saw coming. And so I was a little more aware of the feelings I would feel and sort of how to get through it. This was another shift in my mindset, because I really felt like once this happened, I felt like I was really able to just process the entire situation. And I might not be able to describe this accurately or well, but events like these, even as horrific as they clearly are, it's another harsh reality, but life does go on. So there I am now in August of 2012. But I'm still a functioning addict, so I'm still able to excel at work, do good work, and then, waste my evenings. I was sort of getting fed up with myself as I found myself sort of just stagnating, not doing anything but wasting away and going to work every day. And I decided to start a journal where I would basically tell myself how disappointed I was in myself for what I was doing, tracking my progress and my thought process. Anyway, I did that for I think it was about 6 or 8 months, when all the words I had been typing into this journal really started to resonate with me, and I decided I needed to quit cocaine. So it was December 2013, right before the new year. I had already made my mind up that I wanted to quit and have 2014 be a cocaine-free year and life going forward. It was the end of 2013, so it's now been almost 10 years. Then in 2015, I also quit smoking. So I was starting to get a little healthier. I was sober, starting to figure out how to exercise. In July of 2016, on my 30th birthday, I took a new job. After a few years at the Hampton Inn, I took my first general manager job. So I'm at this new hotel, which is in a little bit more of a quiet market. So it's a little sleepy hotel, but it's doing well. We're rolling along. I'm doing good as general manager. In the summer of 2016, one of my coworkers comes in, and I'm eating a donut from Dunkin' Donuts, and he says to me that I need to stop eating donuts for lunch, because if I don't, I will look like another one of our coworkers who is clearly overweight. And for some reason, that joking comment, I looked at myself and I thought, you know what? Yeah, you probably should stop eating donuts for lunch, and you should probably get into shape. So it was at this point in early 2017 that I really started to look for ways to improve my life. And I wanted to really see what I could do to expand my horizons. And I started to look for exercise. I started to try things out like running around town, and I always thought I would go to a gym at some point. And I tried different things, and one night I searched exercise at home on YouTube, and a video came up, Yoga with Adrienne. And it was a yoga video, and it was a 30-day program. And so I watched this video, and I did it for 30 days. and I could see the benefits from yoga just about a week into doing it, almost immediately. And so that was the exercise of choice for me for a while. I downloaded this app called Sworkit. I was able to create my own yoga programs and my own workout programs. So I started to incorporate, core workouts into the yoga. And it was around the same time, Mother's Day of 2017, where my friend Guy, his mother Lori, invited me on this Mother's Day hike with another friend of ours and Guy's sister Tina. So we wound up going on a hike. I had never been hiking before. As many times as I had gone into the woods, I never considered it hiking. I don't remember following trails at any time when I was younger. I kind of just remember going out into the woods. When we went fishing, I realized now that we were passing hiking trails, but I never paid any mind to them. Even when I would see mountains on the side of the highway, I would look at them, register that they were a mountain, that was the woods, but never really thought about people hiking out there or the recreational activities that took place on mountains. So I joined them at Ramapo Mountain State Forest for my first hike on Mother's Day 2017. I remember it being a mess. I didn't have a map. I was relying on them to take us where we were going. I immediately enjoyed hiking within seconds of being on the trail. And I started hopping around and running and all that. I just remember getting lost with them, not seeing many views or anything, walking through the woods, and then I think we wound up bushwhacking back to the road to road walk back to the parking lot, which now in hindsight is amazing because I know how easy that park is, but I still enjoyed the experience. And I remember as we were leaving, there was a man there that said, "You got to see the castle." He was talking to somebody else, and that stuck with me, and I was like, I want to find that castle. So I let about a month and a half go by. It's now July 2017. And I get a friend of mine and I say, let's go find this castle. So this is really what I consider my first hike, because I seeked out a map and I navigated and we made it to the castle and we got to the views up there. And that was the first time that I think I really realized the benefits of hiking. The increase in happiness, the workout it provides, the feelings of achievement, just all of that. It felt really good. And so that got me set off on hiking. So I started getting out there any chance I could. Any day I had off, I was going for hikes. And at that time, I was kind of just searching online and picking places at random and just heading out. So within the first couple of months of me hiking, I had started with Van Slyke Castle. And I remember I did my first solo hike shortly thereafter. I went to Osseo Rock. I wound up doing, in the summer of 2017, Stonetown Circular Tour, which beat my ass. I was at Mount Tammany. I think I had gotten to Breakneck at that point, and everything just felt so different every time I went. And I would feel sore for days after like a single hike, just a couple miles. But I was really beginning to get into better shape at the time. Between hiking and yoga, I was really starting to see the results. And I had just recently started using Instagram a few months prior, and Instagram made it fun to post the hiking content. And it started to broaden my horizons, so I would be able to see what else was out there and what other people were doing. So now it's September 2017. I'm full in the swing of just hiking whenever I can. It was around this time as well where I was starting to feel a little unsatisfied with the hotel work. Always being on call and dealing with all these issues from disgruntled guests and customers, and just kind of going through the same routine every single day was starting to wear on me. So I was getting a little tired of the hotel work, but it was something I was good at and something that was making me money. So I was offered the opportunity to go back to the Hampton Inn, being offered a great deal. They were offering me a sign-on bonus. They were matching my salary, and they said I need to be there for at least a year and a half. So I thought that was a pretty good deal. For the first time in my life, really, I was able to put a good lump sum of money aside, and really felt like things were going as well as they could be going, but was starting to definitely consider what else I could do instead of working in hospitality. Late 2017, after being back at the Hampton Inn in Carlstadt for a few months, really feeling the pressure of the work that was being done there and really getting tired of the routine, I started to think about how I might be able to combine my career with my passions, hiking primarily. So in December of 2017, maybe late November, I started a website, and it didn't have a domain name. It was wix.com. .com/ and a bunch of letters and numbers, but it was a hiking blog that I called Proactive. And so I started posting pictures and blogs about the hikes I was doing, and I had really bad graphics, and I just let that roll along for a little while. I kept thinking about things that could incorporate hiking into them, and I had an idea for an app, something I would still love to do today, but originally when I started to look into the idea, I realized it was wildly expensive. I spoke to developers and mapped out a whole plan for it, but I realized it's a lot of money to do that. So I continued to kind of brainstorm. It's early 2018, and I decided I'm going to form an LLC and get a real graphic design, the same graphic we have today. And I started Proactive AHW, so Proactive Adventure Health and Wellness. Around this time, I had also purchased the domain proactiveahw.com. I decided I really wanted to start a hiking group, hiking league. I wanted to do something more that focused on the people, the characters that came out to hike with us. I wanted to find out why people were hiking. I wanted to meet people that were hiking, and I wanted to kind of see what made them tick. So in May of 2018, I put together a core group, and we started organizing what I called Proactive Social Hikes. And we did our first social hike on August 3rd of 2018. The group that day was comprised of friends and family that we asked to come out with us so that we can get off to a good start. And even though it was a pretty slow start, we kept posting online and kept advertising our hikes. And by the time our Halloween hikes in October of 2018 rolled around, we were meeting dozens and dozens of new people on these hikes. People were coming out from all over the place to hike with us, and it was really such a cool experience. A lot of the people that we hike with today started hiking with us back in 2018. So we started getting more and more people coming out to hike with us, and we started to really kind of garner a little bit of a following. So our hikes kept getting more interesting as we went along, and it was November 2018 where we introduced patches for some of these bigger hikes we were going to do every few months. In November 2018, we had our first Northern Green Tour, which I think it was maybe 10 miles, but that was one of our biggest ones at that point. And now it's 5 years later, and we're still giving out the patches, and the hikes have just gotten harder and harder. So now it's late 2018, and I'm getting closer and closer to a year and a half. Going through the motions at this hotel and running social hikes every weekend. And as I got closer and closer to February 2019, decided I was going to leave the hotel when my obligation had been completed. I had this little chunk of money that they had paid me when I went there, so I had that to kind of work off of. So I decided we're going to start selling merchandise, we're going to start selling memberships, and we're going to do social hikes every week. And at the end of February 2019, make Proactive my career. So on March 1st, there I was, without a job, with a little bit of money to work off of, and this idea that I had. So then we started to sell these memberships. The membership would open up a new portion of the website, a members-only section that would advertise and allow members to register for, more difficult hikes, more interesting hikes, hikes in different places, just something different. And we had a good number of people buy memberships. So I was making a little bit of money, and I was totally committed to it. At this point, since I wasn't working, we were getting out on hikes almost every day and running these social hikes and these members-only hikes and posting content. So we were really pushing. We were really trying to make something happen. And I was working through that money that I had saved up, not making quite as much as I was spending, but I really had faith in the idea. I was enjoying myself, I was having a good time, and I really saw some potential in what we were doing. But I knew I needed to do something to kind of get some more money so I can keep Proactive running. So I begrudgingly went back into hospitality for a short period and was doing that part-time. I needed to keep Proactive running. November 2019 was the first time we did the Devil's Path, and I remember that being our first 20-mile plus hike. It's one of the most dangerous hikes here on the East Coast, breaking trail for 24 miles. And I just remember really feeling that level of achievement and just the beating it gives you. And I felt fantastic. And this is where I really got the idea of pushing limits and testing limits and really pushing yourself. And Proactive definitely took on a different tone after we completed the Devil's Path. And now we're in January of 2020. I've left the hotel again because that was only a part-time gig. But Proactive's doing great. We were building more of a following. We're meeting more and more interesting people every week on these hikes. Our hikes are getting more interesting and people are noticing them online. We have things like Breakneck Triple, where we're climbing up Breakneck multiple times in a day. Beacon Bully, which was another patch hike we were doing. That was 16 miles and 5,000 feet or so on Mount Beacon and Breakneck. And so we're doing these cool hikes. People are noticing. Our momentum is rising. The outlook is good. And another thing I decided to do at this time was go back to work. So my grandfather was an important figure in the motion picture industry. And a lot of members of my family are involved. And I always enjoyed working with my father when I had the opportunity to do so. But because my grandfather, who was an important figure, always hated the idea of me doing it and had told me on many occasions that instead of working in motion pictures, that I should do my own thing. This is a lot of the reason why I actually got into hotels, because I was trying to do my own thing, you know? And so to me, never seemed like a feasible idea. I never pursued it. Without getting into too much about it, it's a lot of hard work. It's very early and long hours, but it's good pay, and it's very interesting work, because you can almost find yourself doing anything on any given day. And you're in a different location almost every day. So it really keeps your brain stimulated. And so with my grandfather having passed away, and with my father having passed away, I would have to go find my own contacts. And so that's what I did. I got back into this really interesting, really fulfilling line of work. And things were really looking good. As many of you will remember, January 2020 is when the news started mentioning this flu from China. And I remember seeing it become more and more prominent on the news each morning before I'd leave for New York City on a bus and a couple subways. So I remember that being in the back of my mind a lot during that time. I was working on the TV show Prodigal Son. So I was having a good time working on this show, and a few months went by, and then bam, it's March 2020. Really enjoying my work, and then things start to get weird. All of a sudden it's, March 15th, 2020, things are getting shut down. I get a phone call that there's not going to be any work for at least 2 weeks, which turns out to be indefinitely. So there's no work, but I still have Proactive. As things start to shut down, we have a social hike scheduled at Pyramid Mountain. So I'm going on this social hike, and I remember Pyramid Mountain being packed. It was on March 14th, 2020. Packed with people, all looking at each other suspiciously in their little groups. And so we do that hike. Things are really weird. The next week we go to Minnewaska and we do Minnewaska tour. It's March 22nd, 2020. I think it was that evening they were going to shut down all the parks, so we had to make sure we got out of there before that was shut down. It was during this period that I got into running. We were still hiking, but just not hiking as much. Especially with all the different restrictions and the rules that were changing at the time. So I got into running quite a bit during the pandemic. And I remember one of the weirdest things about the pandemic is that we did proactive Zooms because we weren't able to meet up as easily. We had one point had maybe 20 people on a Zoom, and we did that for a number of weeks. And I'm really happy that we were able to do that early on in the pandemic, because I really feel like that kept us in touch. I feel like that helped all of us get through this weird period. There was a lot of uncertainty. So we were still hiking, but just the social hikes were canceled. We waited a few months, but in July 2020, we decided to get back to our social hikes. It was July 11th, 2020, and we went to Storm King Mountain. And the vibes were so good that day. Everybody was so happy to be back. I really believe it helped keep people sane, honestly. It gave them something to do. And I was really happy that we could help a lot of people during that weird time. So our momentum continues to rise, especially during the pandemic, because we were offering something acceptable to do at the time. People were enjoying themselves, and people were safe. Nobody ever got sick when they came out on a hike with us. Not once. There was a lot of momentum through 2020. Our hikes are getting bigger and bigger. We're going to the Adirondacks. We're doing multiple 20-mile hikes, double-digit hikes. Proactive was doing really well. And now it's 2021, and in April, I get a call to go back to work. and it's going to be in Hartford, Connecticut. So I get back to work. I'm away for a few months. I come back on the weekends to do proactive hikes. Those few months away after I got back to work were really great. And since that job, I've continued working full time in the motion picture industry as a set dresser because I really enjoy the work. And it's fruitful work. So for the past few years, although we still do social hikes, still do the interesting hikes, we don't do them as frequently. And I sort of balance out my work and work life, I guess we'll call it. So between proactive and my job, I still run proactive, but we just do less frequent events. And I can always rely on my core group of maybe 20 or so people to pull together a hike at almost any time. So welcome to part 2 of the Proactive Adventure Health and Wellness podcast, episode 0. This half, I promise you, will be much briefer. So I'll admit, I recorded the first half of this podcast on this past Saturday, the day before Spence, John, and I did Minnewaska Tour, which is a great day, 20 miles and about 3,000 feet. Anyway, that was definitely the abridged version of the story. The details aren't really that important. And hopefully I'll be able to get into some more details as things come up in the future episodes during discussions with others. So now at least you have a little point of reference where I'm coming from and where some of the themes that Proactive is based around come from. So why did I talk about all of that to try to explain Proactive? And I chose certain events to share because they directly or indirectly inspired the true spirit of what Proactive is all about. I chose to discuss change and grief and hardship or trauma because, we all experience it. Everybody experiences hardship. And, we all must persevere. Everybody must carry on. Everybody has to move forward, much as we must do on hikes, which is a nice, easy correlation. Like I said many times in the first half of this podcast, life always marches on. And life's too short. The death of my parents gave me proof of that. And this is where a lot of the Be Proactive, Thrive Now comes from, because I just believe in doing things while you can do things, because time is precious. Life is short, you can't waste it, and you really just gotta seek out what feels good for you while you're here. I spoke a lot about my professional life because throughout all the jobs that I had and the positions I held, I so truly believe in not letting yourself get complacent, pushing limits, and progressing in all aspects of life. It's another good correlation to hiking, but you should always just be pushing and trying to progress. It's really just not a good thing to stagnate or to limit yourself. And so now we get to the point where I talk about what I want the podcast to be about. And so if I had to pick 3 things, general topics that I wanted to talk about, I think that's pretty easy. It would be adventure, health, and wellness. And this is what I want the show to really be about. I spoke a lot about exercise in the first half of the podcast and my path to hiking. And obviously everybody doesn't have the same path to health, but it's going to be very interesting to hear what people's journeys were on getting healthy, starting to work out, how they discovered hiking or whatever it is that they choose to do. It's going to be really interesting to hear why people started doing it, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting stories. I started truly getting fit when I was 30, and I'm in the best shape of my life now at 36. And I was able to speak about overcoming addiction in the first half of the podcast through discipline and effort, without any outside help, which I'm very proud of. And this is by no means a how-to. This is just an example that things can be overcome, not how to do it, because everybody's path is so different. I want to hear about people's routines, their eating habits, their greatest feats. I really want to get into how they stay healthy and what they do to be healthy, and how they seek wellness. And I view wellness as a very broad topic. I really define wellness as anything somebody does to improve their life, make them feel better, make them happy, what gives them that boost, what gives them motivation, what gives them inspiration. And I want to talk to people about that, where they find wellness. And that's where adventure comes in, because adventure, hiking in particular, has been a common thread for everybody involved in Proactive, among a myriad of other activities. I want to hear about what led people to adventure, what led people to hiking, what led people to the outdoors, and I want to hear about how this lifestyle affects all the other aspects of their life. I want to hear about the places they go, what they do, how they do it. I want people to be able to share and relive those experiences and those adventures with us. So that's what Proactive is all about, and that's what the Proactive Adventure Health and Wellness podcast will hopefully be about over the course of the next weeks, months, and years. I'm hoping to have some really good conversations with Proactive members, people that have come out on Proactive social hikes, some of you from social media. I have some cool things lined up, and I'm excited. In a few days, I'm going to be doing my first interview for the podcast with Vanessa Vaglio, who has been with Proactive since January of 2018, and she's a fixture of our more difficult hikes over the past few years, and she'll be running the Breakneck Marathon on May 7th, so she's been training hard. I'm really looking forward to speaking with her pre-marathon, and again, post-marathon, and really see where her mind's at. And then from there, I don't exactly have a schedule planned, but I hope to release a few of these episodes a month. So keep an eye out on the social media accounts at ProactiveAHW and on the website at www.proactiveahw.com for updates on the podcast and obviously for social hikes that we may have coming up, which are free if anybody's wondering. And one thing to remember is that even though right now we're definitely a Northeast regional niche type of group, with involvement of this whole community, we might be able to make this podcast into a big thing. And I'll believe that we can, and take it on as a challenge to push my limits, to be proactive and thrive now. Makes sense, doesn't it? So if you've listened to this whole thing, well, I love you, and thank you. See you next time.